Well, welcome back. This is now our 5th video in our series of the scientific method. And we left off with this slide talking about the different 7 steps. We've gone through them in pretty good detail. What we're going to start today is we're actually going to start to go through an example of how the scientific method can be used. So we're going to put our knowledge of this method to a realistic example that includes some terms you'll be needing to use and understand. So again, I'm going to want you to have your notebook out, the same one that maybe you've been using, because there are going to be some definitions, some terms that we're going to be discussing as we go through here. So the first step obviously was our problem or question. So we had a student, John, as you can see here, and he watched his mother bake, or his grandmother, sorry, bake bread, and there's a picture of his grandmother baking some bread there. He asked his grandmother what makes the bread rise, meaning when you put bread dough into a pan and put it in the oven, it's a lot smaller, and as it bakes, it actually gets bigger, and if you look, you can see how it's actually coming out over the pan there in the grandmother's picture. And he's asking, what makes that happen? Well, she explains that there's something in the bread that she puts in there called yeast. And that releases a gas as it feeds on sugar. What I like to say is, as the yeast eats the sugar that you put into the bread, one of those ingredients in bread, they kind of burp. And they cause these air bubbles that kind of makes your bread rise. Now, if you're thinking of a slice of bread, if you've ever had a slice of bread and there's a hole in it, that's because in that certain area there was a lot of yeast that actually were congregated in that area, produced a lot of gas in that area, kind of burped in that area is what we kind of say, and that's what makes the bread rise, and that's what makes the bread light and fluffy, and why people like it. But that is, he was wondering, why does that happen? And she kind of explained that, well, it releases this gas as it eats this sugar. So that's the problem or question. Why is the bread rising? So John wonders if the amount of sugar used in the recipe will affect the size of the bread loaf. So what he's thinking is, well, if we put maybe more sugar into it, maybe the bread, they'll eat more, they'll kind of burp more, and the bread will get much bigger. And you'll have more bread, or a bigger loaf of bread, than maybe what his grandmother usually gets. So that's the problem in question. That's what he's wondering. So we have to pause right here and look at some vocabulary words. So what I want you to do in your notebook is I want you to write down the 2 words that are in red on this slide. And as you're writing them, again, leave a little bit of space so that we can go through some definitions. So if you want to write those down right now, push pause on the video and you can write those down and leave a little bit of space. So I'll give you a chance to do that now. Okay, you've got those written down. The word is effect and affect. Now those are 2 different words and they mean 2 different things. So we're going to be using those in our scientific method, in our science fair project, to explain how things are happening. So it says effect is usually a noun. Remember, a noun is a person, place, thing. It's something. Okay, and affect is a verb. Remember, a verb describes, okay, or shows action. It does something. Okay, so when something affects, it's what's happening. So the effect of sugar amounts, that's how much sugar we're putting in there. Okay, on the rise of bread. Remember, sugar, the effect is the amount, that's a thing. Okay, how does the sugar affect the rising? Rising is moving. Okay, it's an action. So you can see, how does sugar affect the rising of the bread? Okay, so the sugar is the thing that we're using, the thing, and the rising of the bread is how is it affecting, that sugar affecting it. Okay, so effect and affect. Another example of this would be if I was going to pop a balloon with a pin. Okay, the effect would be the pin itself. Okay, the affect would be if I stuck the balloon with the pin, and the pin, what happens then? The balloon pops. That's an action. It pops, it breaks. Okay, so those are the kind of differences between effect and affect. Effect is something that you have. The affect is what happened to it. Okay, so we got to make sure we have those 2 things separated. Okay, as we move forward then, Back to our observation and research, that's our second step now. John researches the areas of baking and fermentation. Now, what I would like you to do is kind of a little homework assignment. Find out what that word fermentation means and tries to come up with a way to test his question. What I would also like you to do for a homework assignment is, off of this slide, is come up with a way that you would test his question. Remember, his question is, do we add more bread? Okay. I would also like you to come up with a possible hypothesis for this. Okay, so come up with a hypothesis. What's his hypothesis going to be? Remember, going back to our hypothesis notes, if you need to go back and watch that video, hypothesis is an educated guess, and we need two key words. If something happens, then something else happens. And that's where we're going to come up with our discussion for class the next time you come in after watching this video. So you got your observation research. You're going to look up the word fermentation. What does that mean? You're going to come up with a hypothesis. If something happens, then what else happens according to this? If you need to go back and watch the video, you can, to figure out what John's researching. And then I also want you to come up with a way. How could he test this? What would be an experiment that he could do? That's what we're going to see how he did his then in the next video. So that's your homework assignment for this video.